Okay, it is recording. You might want to pause it.
I unmuted. Where's the sound?
Robert Lennick is on mute.
Yes, we see that. The rabbi is muted.
You need to unmute. No, you can't do it. We still don't hear anything.
Still muted.
Send him a message.
We already told them.
Hmm?
We told them.
I know, but send a text message. Chat. Type message.
Still muted.
1B, right?
Yes.
2B.
Okay. No, it doesn't have the mute. Yes, it. I guess they're trying to figure it out. Wine cup. It's 12 minutes after 6, and it's nothing. Anything else in the chats?
It looks like he started.
Say still no sound.
Yeah, he started and no sound.
Yes,
Yes, there's still no
no
sound.
sound.
No sound at all.
We sent a text message, but they've got to be able to read it.
No sound.
You know, there's no other way to send a message.
This is the only thing. And he keeps making.
It doesn't look like he's having the service. I mean, why would he be holding their fingers?
Yes, it looks like a service.
Looks like it, but we hear nothing.
No, not a thing.
Does he know we don't hear anything?
There's no sound. Yeah, good. Good idea.
Good, that's a good thing. Because they're not looking at us.
I don't know what else to do.
Okay, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, I hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, we hear you, but yeah, we don't hear anybody at Temple Aaron.
Right.
But I gotta write this backwards now.
You have to write it backwards.
That's a good idea.
Can he see us?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, uh-huh.
I know. I
All
said,
right, we'll call this take 3.
all
All
right,
right,
Can you
good.
hear us now? Can you hear
Yes,
us now?
yes,
yes.
yes. No, that, you click that if you want to.
He's unmuted. Looks like.
Still don't hear anything.
I think this is all.
You should be unmuted at this point. Guys, can anybody out there hear us?
Yeah, I
Yes.
can hear it,
Yes.
and he looks
Okay.
unmuted.
Great,
Thank
okay.
you.
Okay, so guess what? It turns out Passover is really 2 holidays rolled into one. And if you go back to the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, they observed a holiday called Pesach. And that holiday was a springtime holiday when the clan would get together, all the families of the nomadic clan, and they would kill a lamb, and they would take the blood from the lamb, and they would put it on their tent posts. And it was a symbol of solidarity that all the families of the clan would stick together for another agricultural cycle of the year. And that holiday was called Pesach. Most of us have never been taught this distinction. We think the first time lamb blood was put on a doorpost was in Egypt, Not true. Our ancestors have been putting the blood on the doorpost to celebrate Pesach, the Passover holiday, the Paschal Lamb holiday. They had been doing that for 600 years before the Israelites ever even left Egypt. It was an annual springtime festival, a festival about the love and the commitment of the family to stay together. And remember we maybe heard about blood brothers, blood sisters growing up. They made covenants in blood too. Our own ancestors did. Circumcision is a blood covenant. It's all about that using blood as the symbol of the highest type of a promise. And so our ancestors celebrated Pesach and eventually became slaves in Egypt. And when they were slaves in Egypt, under Pharaoh, they continued to observe this Pesach holiday. Here's the twist. On the night of the Exodus, after the 10th plague, the Jews were told, tonight, when you put the blood on the doorpost, in parentheses, like you've been doing for 600 years, tonight especially don't forget. Because tonight, when you put the blood on the doorpost, it'll be a symbol to the angel of death. It'll have a new meaning, two meanings to pass over your house.
All right.
And so it began as the blood symbol of family fidelity and springtime, and the clan evolved. And when the Israelites are leaving Egypt, right in the book of Exodus, it's an amazing thing. In one sentence, it says, and on the 14th day of Nisan, you shall observe the festival of Pesach. And on the 15th day of Nisan, you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, Chag HaMatzot. So you shall remember the Exodus from Egypt. So Passover and the Haggadah and the Seder is constructed to give us a reminder of both holidays. The springtime part of the story, the family clan alliance part of the story, and the liberation part of the story. So understand that the putting of blood on the doorpost is considered one of the oldest continually observed rituals in world civilization. It has an origin with our people and similar rituals in other groups of people as well. And so two holidays we celebrate tonight. And if you look at the Seder plate, we see the symbols of both. Of course, this is the symbol of Chag HaMatzot, the festival of unleavened bread. We call it the poor bread, or the bread of affliction. Why? Because it's a reminder the dough didn't rise, not only when they were slaves, but in their escape. They were in a rush. The bread of affliction. We have here the shank bone, reminder of the Paschal offering, of the lamb offering, given all the way back to the time of our earliest
In front of the camera.
ancestors.
Shank bone.
It's a dancing shank bone. We have the egg. Why do we have an egg? A lot of times the egg is roasted to remind us of the ancient temple sacrifices, of roasting sacrifices on an altar. But the egg, there's the egg, is one of the most universal symbols of rebirth, life, fertility, springtime. We have also the greens, symbol of springtime, right there. I don't know if waving the greens does anything. Then we also have the charoset, the mixture, and there are many recipes for this across the Jewish world. Sephardic recipes, Eastern recipes, Southern recipes, you name it. It is one of the most diverse forms of one food you'll ever find. And it's usually made of apple, nuts, and wine. Sometimes people put in a little brown sugar. And it's supposed to represent, who remembers, the mortar used by our ancestors in building these structures under Pharaoh. And then we have the maror, the bitter herbs. The bitter herbs, which remind us of the bitterness of slavery. The bitter herbs actually are supposed to remind us to always be empathetic in every aspect of our lives, that there isn't always an obvious reason for suffering. Sometimes suffering just happens. But no matter why and when it does happen, Judaism teaches us, as Jews, it should counsel us and teach us to be empathetic. It's worth noting, someone once said, Rabbi, what's the most important commandment? Well, I can tell you they didn't answer that question in rabbinical school. But I have a theory. Think about growing up. Ask yourself, what's the one thing my parents said to me over and over and over and over again? The one value, the one rule, the one piece of advice, the one thing that was stated all the time. It's like it was the main message, and it was like, and you ask yourself, why did they have to say that over and over and over again? And the answer is because it must have been most important. So I answer the question about what is the most important commandment, and I say, which of the commandments was repeated more than any other? Just like, what did my parents repeat more than any other? And the one commandment repeated more than any single commandment, and in fact, it's amazing, it's repeated 36 times. 36 times. And the commandment says, remember the heart of the stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now, if that is not a message about empathy, that whatever we deal with in life, whatever our suffering, whatever our chains or shackles, the most important thing we can do with these experiences is to remember the heart of the stranger and live our lives as empathetic human beings. Now, it's interesting because you open a Haggadah, and we just happen to have a Maxwell House Haggadah right there. Maxwell House Haggadah. And I learned tonight, do you know why Maxwell House made Haggadahs? Because they wanted to open up a market in the Jewish community to sell coffee. So they did. And I remember the Maxwell House Haggadah as a little child. The thing is, the Maxwell House Haggadah is a traditional Haggadah. There are a couple of things about the Haggadah worth noting. Number one, this story, the word Haggadah means the telling or the story. This whole story of the Exodus from Egypt in the Haggadah is written in such a way that Moses' name is never mentioned. Why? Because they didn't want people to worship Moses. And they didn't want people to make the mistake of thinking Moses was the savior, but to emphasize God was the savior of the Jewish people, to distinguish our tradition from other traditions. The other thing we find in the Haggadah that's very interesting, it's a line that often is not talked about, but I want to mention it tonight. We hear the 4 questions, and Evan's going to chant the 4 questions in just a second. And after we hear the 4 questions, we're supposed to tell the story. And how does the story begin? It begins with the following line. It says, my ancestors were wandering Arameans. Now, what does that actually mean? To be called an Aramean was like to be called a homeless, useless street person that you would see on the street, and it would make you want to run in the other direction. Our ancestors were poor. Our ancestors had very little at the beginning. Our ancestors started with no influence whatsoever. And what we read in the course of Jewish history is how our ancestors, who were nothing more than wandering Arameans, we end up, what does the Torah say, as Am Kadosh, a holy people. You ask yourself, how is it that this happens? Well, there are a lot of answers to that question. But part of the message of Passover is to embrace the responsibility to be that holy people and to recognize how far down we've been and then how high up we've gone. So we're going to turn to the 4 questions because, they wanted to make the Seder interesting to the kids. And these are the 4 questions. All right, Evan. Thank you. Beautiful. First question is sort of not the real question. It's the summation question. Why is this night different from all other nights? And then specifically, on all other nights, we eat leavened bread or matzah. Why only matzah? Who would like to answer? Why only matzah? Why are we commanded to eat matzah for the period of the 7 or 8 days of the holiday? No leavened products. We even go through a whole big ritual to clean it out and put it away or sell it. Why such a big Megillah? Well, Megillah is another holiday, mixing Purim and Pesach. But how such a ganze Megillah around unleavened bread? Why do we do this? It's to remember the circumstances of our ancestors. It's also not to just remember it theoretically, but it's to experience some hardship. And let me tell you, if you eat too much matzah, you'll have hardship. You will have hardship. And so just to be careful with it, just be careful with it. I say this every year because it's true. So we eat unleavened bread, not only theoretically to think about hardship, but to experience some hardship. Second question, why on this night do we eat on all other nights, we eat all other kinds of herbs. On this night, bitter herbs. Why do we eat bitter herbs this night? To remember the bitterness of slavery. But why don't we just talk about it? Why do we eat horseradish that's supposed to hurt? So again, so we can experience, even in a moment, some of the pain and the bitterness of their experience. So now you see how these rituals intend to cross the boundaries of time. They're not just rituals about what happened. They're trying to bring what happened into our immediate experience. Here's the third, on all other nights, we do not dip herbs at all. On this night, we dip them twice. Now, we're not going to be doing that, but why? What are the 2 times we dip in a normal Seder? The first is we dip the greens in the salt water. And the salt water is for the tears. But why dip the greens of spring in the tears of hardship? Yes, to show you that hardship is not never ending. Darkness leads to dawn. Jewish tradition is magnificent in this way. It's called hopeful realism. We always balance the realism of life with the hope of life in all of our rituals. Think about it. At a wedding ceremony, we break a glass. Why do we break a glass at such a happy event? To remind us Things get broken in life. Be realistic. As hopeful as you are right now, be realistic. And so the dipping of the greens in the salt water is that balancing. What's the other dipping we do? We have the 10 plagues. We take drops out of the cup. Very good. Why do we take drops out of the cup for the 10 plagues? You're on the right track. It's to say, it's a reminder that the wine is sweet. And even though as a result of those 10 plagues, we found freedom, the suffering on the receiving end of those plagues lowers our joy. There's a famous story. If you remember how it happens, they leave Egypt, they come to the Red Sea. The sea is just a sea. They don't know how they're going to get on the other side. Finally, the sea parts. They get to the other side. Anybody remembers what happens when they get to the other side? What the Torah teaches? It's a very special section of the Torah. It's actually a section written in poetic form in the Torah scroll. One of 3 sections written like that. And it's written in poetic form. It's called the Song at the Sea. Familiar part of it, you've probably prayed it your whole life. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi. Who is like you, O God, among the gods that are worshipped? We're taught that Miriam and the Israelites broke into song and dance when they survived the Egyptians and crossed the sea. But the Midrash teaches that God silences them. And God says to them, yes, you are free, and that is your destiny. But how can you rejoice when my creatures have suffered? So even in victory, we do not rejoice in the suffering of others. And so that's part of why we take the drop out of the cup for the plagues. And the last question, on all other nights, we eat our meals sitting any way we like. And on this night, we're supposed to lean. Now, I always wondered, that probably has something to do with the Greek roots of this Haggadah. There's a lot of story in Greek literature where people would sit around and lie down while they ate. You have the image of someone being fed grapes. Not a very good image, I might say. But what's this notion that we should lean? And I'm curious, as you were growing up, how did the leaning get enacted? Yeah, that's what my great-grandfather had like 5 pillows all around him on all sides. Like he had stacks of pillows on all sides and stacks behind him, and he sat on pillows. And I never understood why. It was partly because he would hide the afikomen somewhere in those pillows. And if he had too many pillows, we couldn't figure it out. But it really was the notion of when you're a free person, you have the leisure and the ability to relax. And that's really why we lean, to remember what it's like not to have a bit of an unburdened life, especially if you've been a slave. So those are the 4 questions. Now, turns out in the Haggadah, we have a song that everybody likes to sing. It talks about we were slaves. Today we are free. Today we are free. The song is Avadim Hayinu. Avadim Hayinu. Hayinu. Ata v'nechorim. V'nechorim. Avadim Hayinu. Ata v'nechorim. V'nechorim. Avadim Hayinu. Ata v'nechorim. V'nechorim. Avadim Hayinu. Hayinu. Ata v'nechorim. V'nechorim. Avadim hayinu ta'ata v'nechorin b'nechorin. Nice. So now we're going to do the 10 plagues right here. So take your Kiddush cup. And you're going to dip your finger in the cup, and we're going to drop one drop for each of the 10 plagues. You can repeat them after me. Dam, Tzvardeya, Kinin, Arov, Dever, Shechin, Barad, Arbe, Choshech, Makat Bechorot. So now we're going to turn the seriousness of the plagues into something not quite as serious. We're going to read, bad things will come to Egypt, to the tune of she'll be coming round the mountain. All right. Bad things will come to Egypt, don't you know? Bad things will come to Egypt, don't you know? Bad things will come to Egypt, bad things will come to Egypt, bad things come to Egypt till we go. First, God will change the water into blood, ick, ick. First, God will change the water into blood, ick, ick. There'll be nothing left to drink with no bath and you'll all stink when God changes all the water into blood, ick, ick. Slimy frogs will roll over everything, croak, croak. Slimy frogs will be all over everything, croak, croak. They will jump all over you, they will jump into your shoes. Slimy will be all everything to do, croak, croak. Okay, you get the idea. Yeah, we're not going to do the whole thing. Leave it to your imagination. So, the Israelites, they leave Egypt in the middle of the night. And I want to tell you a story you probably have never heard. Very important story. So in the middle of the night, when the Pharaoh says, finally, go, like go, please, go. The Israelites are running around Egypt gathering up spoils. But I wonder if you know what Moses and Aaron were doing in the middle of the night. They were not doing that. They were doing something very, very significant. And according to Jewish mysticism, maybe the very reason why we're all sitting here today. So you remember Joseph. Joseph was one of Jacob's sons, his favorite son. You know the Technicolor dream coat and all that. And you know his brothers were very jealous. And Joseph was sold into slavery. And Joseph eventually went down into Egypt. And Joseph became, like the agriculture minister of Egypt and helped Egypt survive 2 famines. In addition, Joseph's family came down to Egypt in the famine, but they couldn't recognize Joseph by that point. He looked like an Egyptian. He'd married an Egyptian. There was everything about him was Egyptian, but just note, he never named his children with Egyptian names. Ephraim and Manasseh, his children, were given Jewish names, even though they knew nothing else but life in Egypt. Well, it says that before Joseph dies, he calls his family together. And he says to them, promise me, when I die, you will not leave my bones in Egypt. When the people of Israel go to the promised land, you will bring my bones with you. Well, it turns out there's a legend that says when God and Abraham had their first encounter, and God and Sarah had their first encounter, we read that there was a light contained in a stone called the stone of eternity. And this light, stone of eternity, would be the eternal symbol of the covenant between God and Abraham and Sarah and their ancestors. And this stone was passed on from generation to generation. But after the time of Joseph, it was lost. On the night of the Exodus, Moses and Aaron remember the promise to bring Joseph's bones, and they go looking for them, and they cannot find them anywhere. So distraught are they that they can't fulfill the commandment, the promise. They go to a witch, and they say, do you know anything about Joseph's bones? And the witch says, I do know of Joseph's bones. And the stone of perpetual light is with him. And together with a witch, they stand up on the shore of the Nile River and they say an incantation. And Joseph's coffin rises up from the bottom of the Nile River. They open the coffin and they find Joseph's bones and they find the stone of the perpetual light. And tradition has taught, particularly among mystics, that had Moses and Aaron not found the bones and kept the promise, they never would have found the stone of the perpetual light. And had that stone been lost to history, we would not be here today. It's a really magnificent story. And it reminds us that the exodus from Egypt was not simply to get away from slavery. It was not just freedom from oppression. It was freedom to live a certain way. It was a freedom to worship God in a certain way. It was the freedom to carry on the memory of our ancestors. Of course, makes me think of another story. Why do we say the Shema? This notion of perpetuating memory. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The Midrash says the first time that was said was not in Deuteronomy. It was actually said by Jacob's children to Jacob before he died. Jacob said to his children, I'm afraid you'll forget God. I'm afraid you'll give up this covenant. And the children answered, Hear, O Israel. Remember, Israel is Jacob. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. We will maintain our faith. And carrying on that tradition, Lador Vador, is really at the heart of it, what the Seder is all about. So there's a lot to be thankful for, and that is why we sing Dayenu. Ilu hotzi anu hotzian, Mitzrayim hotzianu, Mitzrayim dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan natan latu natan la et hashabat natan lanu et hashabat dayenu 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 Ilu natan natan lanu natan lanu hatorah natan lanu et hatorah dayenu. All together now, dayenu, 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 dayenu. God took us out of Egypt, punished the Egyptians and destroyed their idols, divided the sea and led us across dry land, dayenu. Took care of us in the desert for 40 years and fed us manna, Dayenu, gave us Shabbat. Dayenu, gave us the Torah. Dayenu. Now, when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, that happened on the 7th night of Passover. And because of the crossing of the Red Sea is why we do a Seder tonight, the end of the holiday. And finally, to end our ceremony, we come to the cup of Elijah. Did I promise you it'd be the shortest, most intense Seder you've ever been to?
Dayenu.
It's like Dayenu, I know. Rabbi, Dayenu. Not another story, Dayenu, not another story. The cup of Elijah, Elijah the prophet. Why do we have it at the Seder? Because according to the Bible, Elijah heralds the coming of the Messianic time. As we studied during Torah class this morning, whether you believe the Messianic time is surrounding the arrival of a person, an individual, or whether you think of the Messianic time as an era that we all participate in creating, we talk about the spirit of Elijah as being the spirit where the human sense of freedom is really unlocked for all human beings. I will tell you a story. Loretta was with me when this happened. I have a long history of helping people on the street. I've even taken people on the street into my house. In fact, when I was in Denver, Colorado at Temple Emmanuel, 1985, there was a man on the corner of my street in Southeast Denver, and he was panhandling. And I talked to him for a few minutes, and he said, and I gave him some money. He said, "Can I help you? Can I help you do something in your house?" And I did. He came back, and he helped me with something I needed to get done in the garage. And he's looking around, and he says, "Are you Jewish?" I'm like, "Yes." And I proceeded to tell him I was, one of the rabbis at Temple Emmanuel. And he said, "Well, I'm Jewish too." He said, and I haven't been to synagogue in too long a time. This was a Friday afternoon. Came into the house, had him get cleaned up. We took him to synagogue. We didn't see, he left before the service was over. But you just never know. I've always believed that even if I see anyone who asks me for help on the street, even panhandles, if they will come up and they ask me, I will always give them something. Because Jewish tradition teaches that Elijah the prophet will come dressed as a beggar. And that if you turn away a beggar, you could be inadvertently turning away the Messianic age. Because if you turn away the beggar, the heralder of a world of peace, then we're not ready for a world of peace. And so it's funny because I was with Loretta, and we have friends of ours who are not of the Jewish faith. And we were in Nashville. We were in Nashville, and we're walking down the street in Nashville, and I did something people just don't do. There was a panhandler, and I started taking money out of my pocket to give to the panhandler. And our friends were like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you doing that?" And I said, because in Jewish tradition, we're still awaiting the Messianic age, and we believe the Messiah will come dressed as a beggar. God forbid we should ever turn the Messianic age aside. And I think they were shocked, besides the fact that they think the Messiah has already come. But the notion that the lowliest among us are the ones we need to raise up the most.
And then next door neighbors were Jewish, and we're so excited to learn about the religion.
So Elijah the prophet, we lift up the cup of Elijah. We should stand. Everyone should stand to welcome the spirit of Elijah. And if someone wouldn't mind going and opening the front door of the synagogue. Is it already open? It's already open? Okay, good. May the spirit of Elijah the prophet prevail in our life, and may we all live to see the birth of a messianic age. Amen. And then we end the Seder. Now we're going to have 3 more sips. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. That's number 2. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. That's number 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Number 4. And then, just a toast, we say L'shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem, and most importantly, next year, everyone should be able to be together in person in good health. L'chaim, everybody. Good Yantif. We're going to say a motzi. First, a blessing for matzah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher k'shanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. Praised are you, God, who commands us to eat matzah. And then we say a motzi for food. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Motzi lechem min ha'aretz. Good Yantiv, everybody.
So.
And to all of our friends in Zoom land, a good Yantiv to all of you too. Thank you for joining us.
Good Yontif.
It's good Yontif.
I graduated actually. I graduated Colorado State.
She raised the shade.
I studied journalism.
Oh, that's neat. You got a lot of people there. So Rabbi, I saw Shimon.
He's in Denver.
Thank you for letting us join you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Leave.
Yeah.
What's the afikoman?
Anybody is saying anything?
Little mountain. See you in Albuquerque.
I got it. They're unmuted.
Oh, they are on
Mhm.
Okay, great.
But Rabbi, I saw,
How is everybody?
okay. I heard from Shimon, Rabbi. Yes, Hadassah has a book out for cooking that's for sale. And I put us in there with a sukkah he made. So our picture is in there.
Great.
Very nice.
Excellent. Thank you for being there.
Good to see you. Sorry about you. I keep dropping my phone and
Okay.
no, it just keeps going back and forth. Don't know why.
Okay. No worries. It's all good.
How are you guys?
It's all good.
Enrique.
Charoset. Much more Hamish, down to earth. Yeah. Some people do what I did in 45 minutes, in 6 hours. Because they read a lot of stuff. No. Would you like my comment about the maps? The maps will cause you great pain. Hardship. That's what I said. I wonder if people are going to hear that.